The one aspect of Batman's lore that many filmmakers have shied away from in live-action theatrical films is the Bat family. The idea that Batman would have a cast of allies and superhero sidekicks to aid him in his crusade in Gotham City. Many of these characters have been neglected on the silver screen for way too long now, but thankfully DC Studios, under the leadership of James Gunn and Peter Safran, plans to include the Bat family in The Brave and the Bold, a movie set in the DCU that centers on Batman meeting his biological son, Damian Wayne, for the first time. We pretty much don't know anything beyond that basic plot premise, which has led many to speculate about what the Bat family roster could look like. Bruce Wayne in this universe has been fighting crime in Gotham as Batman for an unspecified amount of time, but if I had to guess, it would probably be more or less a decade if they plan to somewhat coincide with the comic timeline. This definitely won't be a version in his early years like Matt Reeves' The Batman, for example. Damian will likely serve as the audience's point of view for being introduced to the DCU's Batman and his wider mythology, so seeing things like Damian first enter the Batcave, getting a good look at Gotham's aesthetic, and meeting Alfred and the other crime fighters.
Hello, Pennyworth. I've heard of you.
At your service, Master Damian.
So this is the fabled Batcave. Grandfather told me all about it. Smaller than I imagined. Very efficient, though.
This begs the question of who Gunn and company might pick and choose from the source material to be prominent members of the Bat family in The Brave and the Bold. For my prediction, I'm going to be taking into account how the creative team probably doesn't want the family to be too large, as introducing a lot of characters at once could be a little jarring for general audiences. Keep in mind, we haven't seen any rendition of the Bat family in a live-action theatrical setting since 1997, so while it'd be cool to have a bunch of characters I like appear in the first DCU Batman-centric film, they're more than likely gonna have a handful of characters on the chopping block. But that doesn't mean those characters will never be introduced. All that does is leave room for them to appear in future projects or spin-offs. I think the Superman movie having multiple heroes active in Metropolis can help moviegoers get used to the idea of lived-in cities having multiple crime fighters, and pave the way for future movies with ensemble casts. The new leadership spearheading DC projects seems to be a lot more enthusiastic about bringing stories about the Robins to the silver screen in some way, shape, or form. The dynamic duo animated movie is said to be an Elseworlds project that centers on the early friendship between Dick Grayson and Jason Todd. The animation studio behind the movie, Swaybox Studios, was working on an animated Catwoman movie for HBO Max before it was cancelled along with 42 other projects, as the CEO of Warner Bros. Discovery wanted to cut back on streaming productions. What's interesting about Dynamic Duo is that it was actually Matt Reeves who sent David Zaslav a video compilation of some of the work Swaybox had done, and Zaslav was impressed. The only problem was that the marketing department thought they needed a larger story if they wanted to release something like this theatrically. Apparently Reeves had always wanted to tell the story of Robin and thought animation was the best medium to do it in. James Gunn, Peter Safran, and Matt Reeves are producers on the project. What fascinates me is how the people at Swaybox talked about how Reeves thought an animated movie that blends CGI and stop motion animation was the best way to tell a story about the Robins. So I don't know if that's an indicator of him not being interested in incorporating the character of Robin in his live action Batman projects. If you plan to introduce Batman's roster of sidekicks to any capacity, you need to do it in a way that feels organic and not like you're just checking boxes to make fans point at the screen with excitement without any substance. When I think of an extensive Bat family roster, one of the versions that comes to mind is the one seen in the Young Justice TV show.
Be careful, alright?
Was about to say the same to you three.
We'll manage.
One of the problems that came with adding new characters over time, specifically after season 2, was that many characters, both old and new, were sidelined or didn't contribute to anything of real importance, which begs the question as to why they were even introduced in the first place. Even before the 3rd season, there was the infamous 5-year time skip between the first 2 seasons that skipped over a lot of character progression within Batman's group. In season 1, we only saw Batman and a 13-year-old Dick Grayson as Robin. In those 5 years, Barbara Gordon was brought into the fold and became Batgirl, Dick Grayson became Nightwing, Bruce encounters a young Jason Todd, takes him under his wing and trains him to become the second Robin. Jason then tragically dies at some point, likely due to the actions of the Joker, which then leads to Tim Drake coming into the mix to become the third Robin. All of this happened off screen. For some reason, the writers added another time skip, having 2 years pass between season 2 and season 3, where Barbara is now paralyzed and serving as Oracle, and 3 new members are added to the Bat family. Stephanie Brown as Spoiler, Cassandra Cain as Orphan, and Catherine Kane as Batwoman. Again, all of this took place off screen. Not to mention you had dangling plot threads that went nowhere, like Jason Todd being a puppet for the League of Assassins, and Talia taking care of a baby Damian Wayne. Now, I'm fine with starting later down the timeline. I'm not saying the DCU should start with Dick Grayson as Robin or even earlier in Batman's career. James Gunn just needs to avoid the problem of introducing a character like, say, Cassandra Cain, for example, where she's first introduced in a movie struggling with her past trauma, only for her next appearance to be in a movie that takes place 4 years later, where she faced significant character progression off screen and does nothing of significance afterwards. I think seasons 3 and 4 of Young Justice are a good example of what not to do when utilizing a supporting cast. Now that that's out of the way, who are some characters I think are going to make an appearance in The Brave and the Bold? To start things off, Dick Grayson showing up as Nightwing is a no-brainer. Majority of the Bat family adaptations, whether it be in animation, gaming, or live action film and television projects, have had Dick Grayson as a part of the roster, whether it be him as Robin or Nightwing, and I see no reason as to why the DCU would be any different. He's the foundation for convincing Batman to be more open to having costume allies. If we're jumping straight to Damian, it's only logical to have Dick already out and about as his own hero. I wouldn't be surprised if he operates in Bloodhaven, considering the city's been mentioned a couple of times in DCU projects.
Star City Metropolitan has brought in animal control experts from Metropolis and Bloodhaven.
What are you knuckleheads doing? Christopher, I thought you were in Bloodhaven.
Yeah, that's what I said.
I don't know how big of a role he'll play, considering the narrative is more about the dynamic between Bruce and Damian, but I would genuinely be dumbfounded if he didn't show up at all in the movie, because if that's the case, James Gunn and I would just have to scrap, you feel me? I don't know how someone could fumble the bag to such an extent. Another no-brainer would be Alfred Pennyworth. I don't think I need to explain this. Like, dog, it's Alfred. Why would he not be in the movie? He's appeared in every single live-action movie dating all the way back to the 1940s serials. It's also been confirmed that there are plans to include Catwoman in DCU projects, but we don't know what her relationship to Batman will be like during the events of The Brave and the Bold, or whether she would be considered part of the inner circle. So even if she doesn't show up in that movie or isn't close enough to be considered a Bat family member, we at least know she'll show up at some point. After Batman and Robin, Batgirl is without a doubt the most recognizable crime fighter out of the bunch. A lot of the more prominent depictions of Batman's network of allies have Barbara Gordon operating as Oracle or fighting crime as Batgirl. If they were to adopt parts of the post-crisis timeline, by this point, Barbara would have been shot and paralyzed by the Joker. But since the DCU will be a new adaptation, it's hard to tell how they'll go about the timeline of each Bat family member, since these things aren't always copy and paste. They could do something akin to the New 52 where Barbara was the current Batgirl, alongside Damian being the current Robin. If it were up to me, I'd have it so that Barbara is Oracle, while the mantle of Batgirl is donned by Cassandra Cain. I think that would help differentiate the skill sets of the individual members and better showcase Barbara's expertise in the field. As Oracle, she created one of the world's most powerful computer systems to serve as an invaluable resource for Batman and his allies. A lot of her shining character moments came from her time as Oracle, with her connections to other heroes and how well she could provide intel. There also might be some validity to the idea of Cassandra Cain being the current Batgirl. All the way back in 2017, when asked which female comic book character he'd make a movie about if given the opportunity, James Gunn answered the Cassandra Cain version of Batgirl. In 2023, Bleeding Cool put out a list of 8 heroes they'd like to see in the DCU, to which Gunn replied that 4 out of the 8 listed characters were accurate. The 8 listed were Nightwing, Cassandra Cain, Static, Vixen, Roy Harper, Tara Markov, Jonathan Kent, and Kyle Rayner. He's gone on record multiple times saying that Cassandra Cain is one of his favorite lesser known characters, or how his favorite Batgirl is a toss-up between Cassandra and Barbara, so it wouldn't be surprising if he found a way to incorporate her in some way. Cass as Batgirl could also tie into the inevitable presence of the League of Assassins, since her father David Cain raised her to be the perfect killer, going as far as not teaching her how to read, write, or even speak at a young age, only teaching her how to master every form of combat and weaponry. David Cain was also a member of the League of Assassins, and his role in training Cassandra was solely intended to create the perfect bodyguard for Ra's al Ghul, so seeing her reformed into a hero could serve as a parallel to Damian learning to suppress his killer instincts and adopt more of his father's moral code, paving the way for him to become a hero in his own right, like Cass. Regardless of whether the mantle of Batgirl is donned by Barbara or Cass, it's guaranteed that there's going to be a Batgirl, as Peter Safran stated the character would inevitably play a role in the DCU after the cancellation of the Batgirl movie that would have been set in the DCEU. When it comes to the next likely candidates to be a part of the established family, for the love of God, do not pull a DCAMU and skip over Jason Todd and Tim Drake just so Batman can encounter Damian faster and have him become the second Robin.
You're sloppy.
No, I'm uninterested.
Get interested.
The pure and perfect Dick Grayson. The first Robin.
Based on what I'm seeing, I was the only Robin.
The Bat Family roster in that universe was a little bizarre for me. You got a few essentials like a Robin, Nightwing, and Batgirl, but the characters introduced in Batman Bad Blood, like Batwoman and Batwing, only have significance in that one movie. Next time we see them, they get killed off in a couple of seconds in Justice League Dark Apocalypse War. Apparently the creatives were toying around with the idea of introducing Tim Drake and Jason Todd down the line after Batman Bad Blood in a quote-unquote new interesting way that's different from the comics.
Huh, that's stupid.
Even though I don't want them to skip over Jason in the DCU, I'd think it'd be smart to keep Jason dead and save his resurrection or him becoming Red Hood for a sequel movie. A lot of casual fans, and especially comic enthusiasts, are very familiar with Jason Todd's story, but many average moviegoers haven't been exposed to Jason as a character, or to the tragedy of him becoming Robin and dying at the hands of the Joker. I think it'd be cool to have Damian and Bruce acknowledge the Jason Memorial in the Batcave, which would pay off in the future. Plus, this allows the opportunity for Red Hood to develop and progress throughout the DCU, instead of jumping straight to him having already reconciled with Batman and the rest of the family. This plays into the idea of keeping the family size relatively small in The Brave and the Bold, as you want to ease the audience into things and not introduce too many characters at once. A live action Under the Red Hood movie as a sequel would go hard in theaters, I'm just saying. For Tim Drake, they could either have him operating as Robin or Red Robin, depending on if they want Damian to become the new Robin by Batman's side near the end of the movie. We know the story will take inspiration from Grant Morrison's run, and during the beginning of that run, Tim was the current Robin and one of the first characters to meet Damian after Bruce. If they wanted to do a balancing act of trying to differentiate two characters with the Robin title, they could have it so that Tim as Robin is more associated with a version of the Teen Titans or Young Justice, and have Damian directly under Batman's tutelage. On another important note, we cannot let Titans be the only live action adaptations of Jason Todd and Tim Drake. Those two deserve better than that. So to wrap things up, the two characters that have been directly acknowledged by James Gunn and Peter Safran to appear in The Brave and the Bold include Bruce Wayne as Batman and Damian Wayne. The no-brainers / safe bets I think are Alfred Pennyworth, Dick Grayson, and Barbara Gordon. It could be a possibility, but I'd genuinely be shocked if they skip over Tim Drake, so I think it's very likely he'll make an appearance. And I think there's a strong possibility of Cassandra Cain being the current Batgirl. I would prefer if they kept Jason dead for the time being, or at least not make Batman aware of his resurrection if he's been revived by the Lazarus Pit. With this lineup, it becomes easier to implement a Bat family in a live action movie, since the writers don't have to face the burden of balancing so many characters in one story, especially in the first film centered on the DCU Batman. Preferably, I would like to see characters like Stephanie Brown as Spoiler, but you have to make some cuts to prevent the roster from being too bloated from the start. But again, that doesn't prevent someone like Stephanie from being introduced in the future. Same thing would apply to heroes like Luke Fox as Batwing, Duke Thomas as The Signal, Catherine Kane as Batwoman, etc. But who would be on your ideal Bat family roster in The Brave and the Bold? Would you prefer to make things more compact, or would you like audiences to be introduced to a larger family cast? Are there any specific adaptations of the Bat family you think would serve as a good basis for the DCU lineup? Whatever direction they go in, I'll be hoping for the best, because a proper live action depiction would do wonders for these characters and engross moviegoers into compelling stories that they'd never had the pleasure of experiencing.